aims to do is to hide the nuances of CCAN from developers and make coding against HDX a much simpler endeavor. So the idea is to use the library to push or pull data from HDX as simply as possible. So there are a few ways in which this is accomplished. First of all, the interface of the library is made as simple as possible. The HDX, I think somebody is not on mute. Could you go on mute, please? Sorry. The HDX objects such as datasets and resources and gallery items are represented by Python classes. So when you look inside the HDX user interface and you see the various the terminology that's being used in the HDX user interface, then when you come to use the HDX Python library, the terminology will be familiar to you. And in this way, we hope that this makes the learning curve as gentle as possible and enables you to get started with programming as quickly as possible. So what were the key sort of design ideas behind the library? I think the number one thing I would say about the whole library is to keep things as simple as possible. So one way, as I mentioned, to do that was to avoid the CCAN syntax. So you don't need to know about the underlying platform of HDX when you want to call a Python method. Then the class structure of the library was designed to be as logical as possible. So in HDX, a dataset can contain 0 or more resources. For those not too familiar with HDX, basically what you have at the top level are the organizations, of which many of you will be a part. So the organization could be the Red Cross. Then the Red Cross can have multiple data sets within HDX. And each data set can have 0 or more resources, and these resources are basically files. The files can be hosted on HDX, or they can be hosted externally on servers or Google Docs or other places. The other thing that HDX datasets have are gallery items. So in the diagram that you hopefully can see in front of you, there's it basically shows the class structure of the library. And I think you can see that it's really quite simple.
We can see it. Maybe you can make it a little bigger.
Okay. How's that?
Yeah, that's great.
So this is basically a UML diagram that shows you how the structure of the library and the classes in the library is the other important aspect is how to actually change information within the data sets. I wanted that to be as simple as possible as well. So each of the classes basically allows you to use a dictionary method, which is basically just square brackets in Python to handle the metadata. So for example, if you want to set the name of the data set, as you can see in number 3, it's really just a case of putting name in square brackets and then equals to whatever the value you want it to be. But where things are a bit more complicated behind the scenes, then there are some helper methods. So for example, with dealing with dates, you might want to feed in different date formats, and the HDX library has a method to help you with that, which I'll come to later. Often with data sets, a lot of the data, the metadata is static, so it doesn't change over time. And for this reason, it's helpful to be able to just import all of that from a file. So the library allows you to import from either a YAML file or a JSON file. YAML being recommended because it's very easy for humans to read. In addition, there are some utility functions within the library which you can find within the documentation, and these may be helpful for various tasks that you might need to do. One thing as a programmer that I've often found is that the setup required to get going with any new library can often be the biggest challenge. And some things are often, when starting a new project, left behind or forgotten about. One of those things is logging. So the library provides logging facilities so that when you're debugging, you don't have print statements all over the place. And by default, it sets up logging. So a lot of it is hidden away from the user. So for those of you who answered in the poll that you are beginners, this will definitely make your life easier. And similarly, there's the possibility, if you're writing something that pushes data into HDX and you want to be alerted to failures by email, that facility is also available in the library. Another aspect is configuration. So that's made as simple as possible by a configuration class, and I will show later how to use that. If the library fails for some reason, then the logging is used to make it clear what operation was being performed at the point of failure. And the idea is to make it as obvious as possible what's gone wrong. So exceptions are thrown rather than just returning a false or a none, so that it's clear what needs to be fixed or changed. And for those of you who are beginners again, or even experienced programmers, there are what are called facades. These are basically a means of simplifying the setup as much as possible. So I will show these later on. Another important aspect of any library is its documentation. And so the documentation is extremely comprehensive for this library. Every method has documentation. And one of the helpful things is that your development environment, for example, if you use PyCharm, can take advantage of the provided documentation. One of the ways in which it can do that is through type hints. So Python doesn't normally have types, really. It's not a strongly typed language. But with type hints, these can help you to make sure you don't make mistakes when you're calling functions and calling the methods of the classes, and you know what types are expected for each parameter of the method. And another way of simplifying things is there's a lot of default parameters. So if you don't specify things, a lot of things will, if you don't specify parameters, a lot of them will already have defaults which you can use. At this point, I will switch to the demonstration to show how easy it is to get going with the library.
Before you do that, there was one question from Andy Smith. For those of us who are familiar with CCAN, is there somewhere where it's possible to look up the mapping of CCAN HDX terms? CCAN to HDX terms.
No, that's a very good question. Actually, the best way is to come and ask me. But now you've mentioned it, Andy, I think it would be a good idea for us to document this. To give you some idea, I think CCAN has data sets, although they used to call them packages. Resources are the same. The sort of trickiest one, if you like, are gallery items, which map to CCAN-related items underneath. But anyway, if you need more information, please feel free to contact me about it.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to show you how to get going with the library. I'm essentially going to run through the tutorial that you can find on the library's GitHub page, so you can easily follow through the steps that I am about to show you in your own time afterwards. One thing I would highlight is that the library is currently Python 3 only. And that's because of the type hints that I mentioned previously that are a feature of Python 3. But I've had one request so far for Python 2 support, and if there is sufficient demand for this, then porting the library to Python 2 is certainly something that we will consider. So I'm going to not show live the full, all of the stages of setting up Python and so forth, and installing the virtual environment. These you can do in your own time. But what I will show is from step 3, which is assuming you've got a working Python installation with virtualenv installed, how to then use that to use the library. So the first step is to set up the virtual environment. For those unfamiliar with what that is, it's basically a sandbox that you can play around in, so that if you mess up the installation in there, it doesn't really matter. So for those of you who are beginners, this is using virtual environments is a practice that I would recommend. The next step is we activate the virtual environment. Then we install the library. Now, you need to change the version to an actual version of the library. So where it says at version here, it needs to be altered to the latest version of the library available. And that you can find from a link that's shown on the tutorial page. So if you click on that link, you can see the different versions of the library, and we can see the current version is 0.81, v0.81. So we change version to v0.81, and then we wait as it loads the library and all of its dependencies. And if you get any errors in this process, this will almost certainly be with one of the dependencies of the library. And if you look at step 5, which I won't go into now, that's one of the usual reasons for failure. So you can you can see that in the tutorial. So now we're all set up with the library, so we can launch Python. So the first step is to import some required classes. So we need the configuration and the data set, because these are the things that we want to work with. Now, when you create the configuration, you have the option to use HDX read-only, which if you're a beginner, perhaps that's a good way to start so that you don't have the chance of accidentally writing something. However, we do have a test website for our organizations to play with, which we call feature, so it wouldn't be a disaster if you wrote to that one. So in the configuration command, which I'll paste here, you can see the HDX site, which is listed as feature, and HDX read-only is a flag that's set to true in this case, and this will mean you can only read from HDX. The other thing this means is that you don't need a special API key, because in order to write to HDX, you need to register on the website and obtain a special key called an API key and set that up. If you do wish to write to HDX and you wish to set up the key, then there's a number of steps that are actually listed in the tutorial at the top under Getting Started about creating the API key file. And in the 7 steps listed, it tells you blow by blow exactly where to find the API key and what to do with it. Essentially, you create a file called .hdxkey in your home directory and paste the value that you find on the HDX website into it. So I have a key, so I'm going, and I intend to write as well, so I'm going to remove the HDX read-only flag. Another observation I would make about this is the configuration setup has changed since the last time I did a webinar about this library. Before, configuration objects needed to be passed to data sets and resources and so forth. Now you need only write this one command to set up the configuration globally. And this makes life a lot easier because it's one less piece of information that needs to be passed around. The data set that we're interested in is from an organization called ACLED, and it's conflict data for Africa. It's this one. And what we're going to do is we're going to load this data set using the HDX Python library, then change this date of data set, save the data set, and then we'll have a look to make sure it's actually changed. So reading from HDX is a very simple process. It's just dataset.read from HDX and the name of the dataset that you want. I'll come later to how to actually search for datasets, but for now we'll assume that you have the name of the dataset. Then we can have a look at what the date of the dataset is. And here I'm using one of the datasets helper methods so that the date is printed in a more readable format. And you can actually specify which format you'd like the date to be in if you wish. Now we will change it. and write it to HDX. So this last step, so we set the dataset date with the format that we're using, and then we call update in HDX, and at this point communication will occur with the HDX website. So if we go to this dataset that we've updated, and now I refresh the page, we can see that the date of the dataset has changed to what I had set it to, i.e. the 26th of July 2015. And I will just change it back. And here you can see that the dataset date has been changed back. One of the things you might need to do is search on HDX for datasets. And you can do that using the user interface, of course, on the website. But it's also possible to do that using the HDX Python library. So here's an example of searching for datasets with ACLED in the name or elsewhere in the metadata. And we want to just return the first 10 results in this case. And as you can see, a lot of information is returned. This is all of the metadata for 10 data sets. And if we want to, within a data set, there are multiple, one or zero or more resources. And so if we want to get all of the resources from these data sets in one go, we can use this helper method called getAllResources, which flattens the list of data sets and returns all of the resources. We would want to do this because we might want to get to the files and download them. So if we run this command, and then have a look at the outputs.
Mike, you're breaking up a little bit. I'm not quite sure what happened, but maybe you can repeat what you just said.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We can print the resources that we've just pulled from the 10 data sets which we found in our search. And this will give you an idea of what the resource structure looks like. But say we are interested in the first of the resources and we want to download it. We can simply download the first object, the file of that's in the first resource by using the following command. And we want to see, in this case, I haven't specified a path. You are able to specify a path if you wish, but we'll see where it's downloaded, and we can see it's been downloaded to temp. So if we look in temp, we should be able to. Yeah, there we are. So we've downloaded an ACLED resource, which in this case was a Excel spreadsheet.
You're still breaking up. I'm not sure if it's just me or others, but I am the host, so I'm hoping it's not going to affect what everyone's hearing.
Okay.
Javier, okay, other people say they can hear it, so, all right.
Okay, that's
yeah.
good. Okay, so once you've finished with your virtual environment, you can remove it and delete it. So this shows that it's completely self-contained, and you don't have to worry about what you've done to your Python setup within that virtual environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other features of the library, which you can find.
Before you jump to that, I wanted to check in with everyone and see if anyone had questions. You can go ahead and type it in the chat or just unmute and ask your question.
This is Resmi speaking. I have quick question. I don't know if you plan to do that in the coming presentation, but do you have an example of use case? Because here we can see that clearly all the API allows us to manage all the data, but is there any example existing from different organization or different setup that could be interesting for operational needs? Over.
Yes, that's a good question, and the answer is I'm going to come to that. There is indeed such an example, so I will show that shortly. Are there any other questions?
Yes, there's one more question. Someone is saying, nice library. How long did it take to build? That's Dale.
That's a good question. I started this around July, but this has not been a full-time piece of work. There are many other pieces of work as well, but it was initiated in July at least, and has been something that I've worked on part-time since then. It's been through a number of releases, and partner organizations who've started to use the library have been very helpful in giving feedback and helping me to see how to make improvements to the library.
Great. So Dale is actually from the International Aid Transparency Initiative, IATI, and they are doing a similar library, so he wants to keep in touch.
Super, and we would love to keep in touch too.
And Andy says he has a use case if required.
Great. Okay, I'm very happy to hear that.
Great. All right, so let's keep on.
How am I doing for time, Becky?
So it is 10:10, so we have 20 more minutes.
Okay, I'll try and keep the last bit brief then, because I think people can read through a lot of this in their own time.
Okay.
I'll just highlight a few features of the library. I had mentioned before that you can use something called a facade, and that is designed to make the library a bit easier to use. And I think the best way I can show that is with the example that comes later, so I'll come back to that one. For the configuration, the parameters that you can change are all listed in the README in the GitHub. And similarly for the logging, there's also parameters that essentially specify where the configuration information is coming from and what the default is if you don't specify it. More interesting, perhaps, is the operations that are available on HDX objects. So aside from reading through all the API docs, there are some highlighted here. So obviously you need to be able to read from HDX, and you can read data sets or resources or gallery items. You can search using the search in HDX method that we looked at earlier. You can create data sets from scratch, of course, and that can be done either from a file, a YAML file or a JSON file, or simply from a dictionary passed into the data set. If we look at a snippet from the ACLED YAML file, then you can see some of the fields that can be filled in. And I can point you to that example. Once you've put all of the information you want into your dataset object, you just call create in HDX to have it be created on the HDX website. Or if you have loaded an existing one and you're making some changes, you call update in HDX. You also have the option to delete as well. On a data set, as was mentioned, you can have, within a data set, you can have one or more resources or one or more gallery items, or zero or more, my apologies. And for that, to add them to the data set, you use this method add update resources or add update gallery. And then you pass in a list of the resources that you, or gallery items that you wish to add. And similarly, you can get all the resources from a data set with the get resources method. And if, as was mentioned in the tutorial, if you have a number of data sets and you wish to get all of the resources out of those data sets in one go, you can call the get all resources method on the dataset class. One of the areas where the library has undergone a number of improvements is in methods to help users with certain fields that are a little more tricky to set up, sometimes because of the way they've been implemented within CKAN. So you have getters and setters for the dataset date, where you can specify the formats of the date that you would like. For the expected update frequency field, which, by the way, is now a mandatory field, it's no longer something that's optional. You have to fill it in on the HDX website or through the API. You have a number of set frequencies. So if you look in the HDX web interface, you'll see every day, every week, and so forth. So the API has a setter that allows you to use the same values that you see on the HDX website, like every day or every week, rather than passing in a number. Similarly, you can add locations on the HDX website. So the library provides a means of adding to a dataset country locations as ISO 3 country codes. Or if you wish to add all the countries in a continent, you can add a continent using a 2-letter code. And the library is a bit flexible there because you can put in an approximate name and it will attempt to guess. So if you put Africa or something like that, it will try to work out which continent that you're talking about. So you don't have to necessarily put in the codes, although it's recommended to be absolutely clear what is being put in. There will also help us for adding tags to your data. And on resources, you have the facility to download them, and also if you wish to store your resource within HDX rather than on your own server, then you have the option to specify the path to a file that you wish to upload to HDX. Within HDX, you have there's a data preview feature, and I think I will leave that for another time. But essentially, there are methods to deal with that. So now we come to a working example. So if we want to create an example from scratch, we can use this facade facility that I mentioned before. And as you can see, the sort of it provides a template really. So you would just fill in your code within the main method, and all of the logging and configuration is all set up behind the scenes. So if you, in this case, provide a generate dataset function somewhere that returns a dataset, then this will be enough to get you going with creating a dataset. So for a fuller example of that, you can go to GitHub to the ACLED example and have a look at the run.py and ACLED Africa py and the config folder, where you'll see the static YAML file, the static metadata within a YAML file, and also all the other configuration and setup that's done in order to write datasets into the ACLED organization. And ACLED actually was one of the ways in which the design of the library was improved. In the process of writing the code for putting information into ACLED, it became clear where there were improvements that could be made. So I encourage you to try the library and to file requests for new features, to report bugs. And even better, please feel free to contribute to the development of the library. We'd be very happy to have volunteers to work on the library and make improvements. That the library is entirely public. All the code is open, and it's on GitHub. So please feel free to make pull requests to add features. Or if you're not a programmer but you need a feature, please feel free to request features directly with us. And also help us to identify places where the library could be used. We'd be really grateful for that. So at this point, yes, we can break for questions, I think.
Yeah, there's just one from Andy again about so he's saying that HDX has stricter rules about metadata than plain CCAN. Is there a way to validate the metadata locally with the library, or is it only validated when you attempt to write it back to HDX?
That's a good question. And yes, there is a way to validate before writing. I'm just trying to see if yes. So we have on datasets or resources, you have a method called check required fields, and you can call that method, and it will tell you whether there are any missing fields. So that's something we have thought of, and that method is obviously used by the library itself for its own internal checking.
Okay. Dale's asking, does HDX prevent publication of invalid data?
No, in a word. I mean, if you put inside a CSV or Excel some data that's invalid in some way, then the spreadsheet will still be made available on HDX. So there isn't a means by which you can validate the data that's in your resource, although that is something that the HDX team is considering, particularly in regards to using the Hexel language or Hexel is with Hexel, you add to your spreadsheet or CSV a row that specifies in a standardized way what the columns are. And so we hope to build on this standardized language and use it for checking and validating data in future.
Okay. Our Dakar Lab team is asking, is there a way to automatically search and download a resource from a particular data set using the library?
It depends what you mean by automatic. I mean, there's certainly search facilities that you can use. So you just specify a search term. There's you can specify filters, and the search functionality is actually within the CCAN REST API. And the library just exposes that at the moment. It doesn't add to that functionality. So,
okay.
Yes, you can find that in the documentation.
Okay.
About how to do that.
Dakar team, let me know if that answers your question. Otherwise, we can do a follow-up. Sebastian is asking, does HDX relate somehow to NetCDF?
Let me just Google what NetCDF is, and then I can tell you.
Sebastian, you can unmute and ask your question.
Network Common Data Form. Okay. No, it doesn't relate to that, but it's interesting that you raised this.
Hello, Sebastian here. Sorry.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So NetCDF is a data management format that was developed by some sub-agency of NASA, I think.
Okay.
Which is actually very much used, especially with climate data. And so after seeing the examples shown here, I noticed a few similarities, so I thought that there may have been some form of integration between formats, but apparently it is not the case.
Okay.
No, not at the moment, I'm afraid. It's actually the first time I've heard of this format, but we will certainly have a look at it and see how.
Good to learn something new for all of us.
Yeah. Yes, at least in very scientific situations or environments is very used, and unfortunately it's kind of it can get messy when trying to use and install the relative libraries for Python or R or other languages. So, well, anyway, it's maybe something to look into.
Okay.
Yes,
thanks.
thank you for raising it with us. Thank you.
Ramy is asking another question. He's saying, I would be interested to push data to HDX and not to get it. We can update the metadata, but could we also push or send data to HDX as well? I would be interested to automatize regular update of file, replacing existing file and upload an update.
Yes, that's a good question, and the simple answer to the question is yes, you can push data to HDX, and you have the facility to upload into HDX's file store the file that you want, and if you keep the resource ID the same from one upload to the next, then it will be a direct replacement of the file, so that the URL that you use to access the file will stay the same. So you can definitely do what it is that you've requested.
Okay.
And that's for those who attended the previous webinar. That's actually a new feature of the library since then.
Okay. Dale is asking. Remy says thank you. Dale is asking if all the docs for the library are in the GitHub README files, and if not, could you demo that quickly now?
Okay, so we have a few places. One is on our public Confluence for the design philosophy of the library. So that one, have you already chatted these links, Becky, or shall I chat them now?
Yes, I did. They're above in the chat, like way at the beginning.
So there's the Confluence site, which is the sort of top-level view of the library. And then there's the GitHub README, which contains the tutorial. And then on top of that, there's a link, actually, from the GitHub page to the API docs. Let's try and find that. Hold on. There's actually a link to the Confluence page from the GitHub page. So once you have that, you can get there. And then the API documentation is also listed under UC, so you can see. Let me just enlarge this. You can see all of the methods that are available on a data set, for example, here. So that's all the documentation that's available at this time.
Okay. I think that is it for the questions in the chat. Anyone else? Oh, yep, Chris Habib is asking if you can give us a sneak peek if HDX plans on linking with mobile data collection platforms to publish data sets. Great question.
Yes, that's definitely a future plan. By mobile platforms, the one we're looking at the moment is Kobo. So that's a project that's on the way at the moment, and we're definitely looking at it.
Yeah. In fact, we've just completed some user research in West Africa, and we'll be sharing more about that on the blog. Any other questions? We've got 5 more minutes. Oh, we don't have 5 more minutes. We have a couple more minutes. One last thing from Chris. Do you want to just unmute, Chris? He's asking about data visualization and Power BI, but...
Yeah, I was
yes.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for the great presentation. Hi, Becky. How are you?
Oh, thank you very much.
I just wanted to ask if you guys are investing any time in researching how to link HDX with smart data analytics and Power BI specifically.
That's not something we're looking at the moment. I mean, Power BI is one of a number of this kind of platform, so we would need to sort of know how many people are interested in using that platform specifically if we decide to go ahead and support it. I know that Google is working on this kind of platform, and then there are others as well. So it's a question of we have limited resources, so we have to be careful about which ones we target. But if one of the things I call again for volunteers, if there's any volunteer who wants to look at this kind of project, then we would be very happy to be as supportive as we can in this kind of work.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry to turn this into a discussion. I'm just going to be very brief in my reply. I work for IMAP, and we're trying to research on ways to gather more humanitarian big data, and I think HDX is a very crucial component in this project. So what we're looking at is basically perhaps some people don't know what they need, but if we guide them properly, I think that we'll reach a sort of like a productive outcome. And the thing is that lots of data is being generated and not really shared on HDX. We're trying to bridge the gap to let people share their data and at the same time try to understand the benefits of linking to such a platform, linking to multiple sources, using powerful smart analytics programs and making up, identifying patterns, trends, improving their response, etc. Sorry for taking too long. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much for telling us about your work.
Yeah, no problem. So Mike, if you just want to give me back the screen, I will pull up the final slide. Can I just take it back myself? Yes, here we go. Okay. So can you see my final slide here? This is all the contact information.
I'm not seeing it
Are
at
you
the
not
moment.
seeing it? Okay. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So yeah, here is Mike's email. Thank you so much for joining us. I sent a link in the chat to the feedback form. We'd love to hear from you. And as Mike said, we're looking for volunteers. So it would be great to just keep in touch. We're on Twitter. We're always happy to hear from you by whatever means possible. And we look forward to keeping the conversation going. So thanks again for everyone joining us, and hope to hear from you again soon.
Thank you for attending, and thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.